Okay, here are the beans. You can see how much they've swollen up overnight. Almost filled the bowl right to the level where the water was. So I'm going to drain these, put them in this big stock pot here, put water in so you've got a couple of cups above the level of the beans, and then we're just going to start that to simmer with a little salt and pepper. I'm going to leave that to cook for about an hour while I prepare the rest of the veggies to go in the beans. So the next piece of preparing for the beans, I'm doing a double batch today because they freeze really well, and my wife likes to be able to have them quick and easy without having to do any prep whatsoever. So I'm just going to take 3 yellow onions, 1 white onion, roughly chop, and then once we have all of that together, we're going to saute this with 8 cloves of garlic, and we're going to cook the onion until it's quite dark brown around the edges and caramelized. That's going to allow the most flavor to come out, and then once we have that cooked, we're going to throw that in with the beans, which are just bubbling away on the stove behind me, and we're going to cook that in there for about 2 hours until the beans get really soft and we're ready to pulp those down into the slurry that's going to make the refried beans. So we're going to get the onions and the garlic ready for the beans, and we do that on a medium-high saute pan with a little olive oil. I'm going to cook a lot of onion in there, so we'll put that in liberally. All of that is just going to add flavour to the beans, regardless of how much is in there, because it's all going to go into the pot as we go. And while that pan is warming up, and I'm going to turn it up just a little more, I'm going to add the onion. And that will start to simmer. Now that we have the onion and the garlic caramelized down, you can see a nice brown crisp little singeing around the edges of the onion. It's ready to go in with the beans, and then we'll let that cook in for another hour, and we'll be ready to hit those with a pole blender and turn them into the raw product to be able to make the refried bean. And here we go with the refried beans. They've been cooking for about 2.5–3 hours now. You can see how everything's got nice and thick. If I were to take a spatula and take the beans, I can just squish them on the side, and that tells you exactly when it's ready to go. So now we're just going to blend everything together and puree it. And one of the questions I always get asked at this point is, should I take out some of the water from the beans before I puree it? The answer is no. All of the flavour and everything else is in that stock. So to take it out, we're actually going to reduce the flavour. What we want to do at this stage is to concentrate the flavours. So once we have it all pureed down, the act of refrying the beans, traditionally they would use lard. I'm going to use olive oil because my wife would kill me if I use lard, but that does also keep them vegan. So if you are not a meat eater, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this. It's very high in protein, delicious in flavour, and completely and utterly vegan. But when you fry it down, saute them in olive oil, I'm going to add more olive oil to the flavour, and the act of frying the beans is really taking out the water and drying them out as you fry them. They'll get a little darker, they'll start to chase around the pan with me, and we'll get a nice consistency. You'll see exactly what you should be looking for when we do it. And that is a refried bean. You can see everything now starting to blend together. We're just getting one big puree. I'm chasing around the pan, making sure I got all of the ingredients. Make sure there's no bits of garlic stuck in there or anything like that as a surprise for later. Once I've done this, I'm going to check the taste. If they're tasting a little bitter, which can happen occasionally, Then I may add a spoonful of pure cane sugar at this point, just to balance the flavour. You may also be tempted to add salt at this point if they're tasting a little bland. Remember that when we concentrate the flavours by refrying them, that is going to make them a little more concentrated in flavour. The salt will become more concentrated, and you may not wish to have done so. So adding salt, I would wait personally until you've finished the refrying process. When you haven't got a big bowl to cool, that would be the time to have a taste, because you could always mix and ladle in then if you needed to. Okay, so now we've got the saute pan warm. Let's put a little olive oil in there. I'm going to take the pureed beans. I'm going to put 3 or 4 ladles at a time in, and you can see start to bubble immediately. And this is the act of refrying the beans. What we're going to do is essentially boil off some of that excess liquid so we get them down to the consistency we want, while at the same time cooking in a little bit more flavour from the olive oil during the frying process. I'm just going to do a few ladles at a time, and I'm just going to keep constantly stirring this. I'm only going to show you 1 pan worth of beans, because you just repeat until you've cooked them all through. And by keeping stirring it, we're just going to mix in that olive oil. Again, if you want to be completely traditional, you can use lard. And the consistency you're looking for, if you see right now, the beans are almost, as I strike the spatula across the pan, it's still liquid, it's still forming and closing those gaps pretty quickly. As it gets down to the consistency we're looking for, that will stop and those lines will stay more pronounced, and the beans will start to track around the pan with the spatula. Now this whole process, especially if I'm doing 3 or 4 cups of beans at once in each pan, otherwise we'll be here forever, it's going to take a few minutes. So let me pause the video a second and we'll come back to it. Okay, now we're getting down to the consistency we want. The beans are starting to track around with the spatula. They're getting a little darker in colour. You can see it's a lot thicker mixture, and this will get thicker still as it starts to cool in the pan to the side. So they are done. All we need to do is let those cool down and they are ready to eat. So I'm just going to keep repeating until I've gone through the whole pot and we have a massive bowl of beans.